These are green Kona coffee beans. And these ones have been roasted. Now, generally speaking, just like with, say, cooking a steak, most people have a preference on how they like their coffee to be roasted. Some like light, some like medium, and some like it as dark as they can get it. Since this is normal, and you can find dark, medium, or light roasted coffee at every supermarket or chain grocery store in America, why is it that expensive specialty coffees always seem to get stuck at a particular place in the spectrum of dark to light, instead of being offered in roasts that cover the whole spectrum from dark to light? Let me give you an example. For instance, why do Kona coffees always seem to get roasted to medium dark, whereas a Kenyan coffee never gets further down than a medium and generally is always roasted as a light coffee? Why can't Kenyan coffee be dark and Kona coffee be light? Why do we have this specificity for each variety or each region? I mean, obviously it must technically be possible to roast any given coffee however dark or light you want, but why does nobody actually do that? Well, what's driving the difference between expensive coffee and cheap coffee is actually pretty simple and pretty interesting. So let's talk about it. Now, there are videos out there that go into great detail about the technique of roasting coffee, how the machines work, but I don't want to get into all the technical data, the heat transfer, the chemical reactions that happen inside the coffee. All that stuff is great, but what I want to talk about is why coffee is roasted the way that it is. Why is Kona coffee roasted different from Kenyan, as an example, and why do we have this specificity in expensive specialty coffee? And basically, there are 4 main reasons why coffee is roasted the way it is by specialty roasters, why you'll have totally different roasters roast the same coffee the exact same way, and why you'll get the same roaster treating 2 different coffees totally differently. And those reasons are variety, climate, quality, and respect. Now, we're going to look at each of these elements in turn, but understand from the get-go that these are all 4 intrinsically linked together in determining how a particular coffee is going to taste. And really, that's the thing that's driving all of this, the taste of the coffee. The 4 things I just listed are not the main reasons why coffee is roasted the way that it is. It's always the taste that drives a roaster to decide on a particular roast level or profile. But variety, climate, and quality are the things that are actually going to determine what's inside of each coffee bean. And of course, it's the material in the bean, the specific makeup of sugars, fats, and proteins that are transformed through roasting into the final product. Those are all determined by the variety, by the climate, and by how it's grown. Respect for the coffee variety, for where it was grown and how it was grown, is what drives roasters to make decisions on how they're going to roast that coffee. They're always going to pick a roast level based on how they're going to develop and accentuate the natural flavors that are already there in that bean. You can't make a coffee bean taste like something other than what it is unless you're just trying to burn it, in which case it doesn't matter where the coffee came from, it's all going to taste the same. It's going to taste like charcoal. Respect for the inherent flavor and quality of the beans is a big part of specialty coffee culture, and it goes hand in hand with other parts of this culture, including transparency and honesty in advertising, paying workers fair wages, and making sure that coffee is produced in a sustainable way so that we have something better than what we were given to hand on to the next generation. And so variety, climate, and quality are what are going to lay the groundwork for what a coffee bean can and will taste like once it's roasted. And so, of course, each particular coffee has its own ideal roast level, the roast level where all of the natural flavors are going to be accentuated and properly developed so that you're not going too far and starting to destroy those flavors by roasting too long, but also not stopping before you get to that ideal point and ending up with something that's really bland and doesn't have a lot of interesting flavor to it. You can play around with that a little bit, go a little bit lighter and maybe a little bit darker, and this is really fun because it provides a lot of experimentation for roasters and fitting in your own personal preference. Some people like a little bit more acidity, some people like a little bit more bitterness, and people have different palates. But even within that variability of what people like, you can't just take, say, Kona coffee and roast it however you want and expect to end up with a great result. It just doesn't work like that, unless of course you think that charcoal is a great result. Now, out of all of those elements, coffee variety is the one that makes the biggest difference. There are basically 4 different types of coffee: Arabica, Robusta, Liberica, and Excelsa. Now, for most people, Arabica is the one that they know by name, and that's for good reason because it is the one that has the best flavor and is by far the most popular coffee in the world. However, what most people don't know is that there are over 120 different varieties of Arabica coffee, and the genetic difference between the varieties is going to determine the exact makeup of the sugars, fats, and proteins and other elements within the coffee that they produce, which of course, as it's roasted, is going to end up with a different flavor profile depending upon which variety you're actually roasting. And these differences can range from very subtle to actually being pretty massive. So I have here a Kona Earth coffee and a Kenyan coffee. This one also is a single estate, just like Kona Earth, so these are some of the best coffees in the entire world. Now, most companies are not going to print the variety on the bag, so this one, I don't really know what the variety is. It didn't say it on the website where I ordered it, doesn't say it on the bag, but it doesn't really matter for this comparison because I know that this is Kona Typica. That's the most popular variety grown in Hawaii, and I know that's the only kind of coffee that Kona Earth is currently selling, and I know that this one is not Kona Typica because Kona Typica isn't grown anywhere outside of Hawaii. And the difference in taste and smell between these two coffees is radical. So this one, it smells like chocolate, it smells like cinnamon and allspice. It is a rich and deep flavor. And then when you taste it, there's this surprising hint of green tea, almost grassiness, alfalfa-like flavor. It's really unique, really, really smooth. This one, on the other hand, when you smell it, it smells like blueberries. It smells like a blueberry muffin, and it is crazy. Until you experience something like this, it's hard to wrap your head around how coffee can even begin to smell like blueberries, but it does. When you taste it, it is bright, acidic, and juicy. It's got lemon flavor, raspberry flavor. It is so radically different from this coffee as to almost feel like these two shouldn't be in the same category. Which, I mean, of course, they're coffee, so they should be. And the main reason why they taste and smell so different is because they are different varieties with different genetic makeups grown in different soil at different altitude with different weather patterns. And so that's why you end up with this radical difference between these two different types of coffee. And so when you take these coffees that are genetically different and grown differently and you roast them, you're not gonna roast them to the same level because the actual chemical makeup inside of each of those beans is so different, they're not gonna react to heat the same way. If you were to roast this to the same level as this one is, you're gonna destroy so much of that acidity and brightness. But if you roast this one to the same light level as this Kenyan coffee, you're not gonna get any of that chocolate. You're not gonna get any of that baking spice. You're really just gonna get, well, it's gonna be boring. Now, specifically when we're talking about climate, we're talking about soil and altitude. Now, I don't wanna get more complicated than we need to, so let me make this really simple. When beans are grown at high altitude, they develop slowly. And the more slowly the beans mature, the more dense they become with those sugars, fats, and proteins and other things. And so the more flavor they have, as well as flavor complexity. Growing at higher elevations gives you cool mornings and evenings. It tends to give you better drainage in the soil than being down in a valley. It also tends to have more volcanic content to the soil, and all of those things are going to make flavor inside of the coffee beans. But every variety is gonna grow best in one particular climate and not every climate. So specifically, when you're looking at Kona coffee, the Kona coffee belt is not super high altitude, but it mimics the characteristics of super high altitude because it has those cool evenings and mornings. And even though it's in the tropics, it gets afternoon clouds every day that keeps the temperature from getting really high. It has very rich volcanic soil. And so it mimics the growing characteristics of the high Kenyan plateaus between 4,000 to 6,000 feet of elevation without being anywhere near that high of elevation. But even though the Kona coffee belt mimics the high altitude of Kenya, it's not exactly the same. And so if you were to grow the exact same variety, one in Kenya and one in Kona, they're still gonna taste different because the climate isn't actually the same. On that note, Kona Typica is historically the main variety of coffee that's grown in the Kona coffee belt, and I think throughout all of the Hawaiian Islands. But that is starting to change with more and more farmers putting in different varieties, and of course Kona Earth is no exception to that. And if you're curious to learn more about the new varieties of coffee that are going to be offered soon from Kona Earth, go ahead and check out episode number 12 in the Coffee Talk series where we covered the farm as well as coffee harvest in Kona. The final part of this equation in determining how you're going to roast a coffee is its quality. And the way that we determine that is through size sorting. And so there's two basic reasons why you sort coffee into larger beans and smaller beans. And the first one of those is because just like with any other kind of farming, if a coffee cherry is really healthy, that means that it is well supported by the branch, and the branch is giving it all the nutrients that it can take in order to grow full and ripe. Whereas a less healthy coffee cherry means that it's not as well supported by the branch, and it's not going to get as much nutrients, it's not going to get that density, and so it's not going to have the same amount of those elements that are converted through roasting into flavor. In other words, the smaller the beans are, the less flavor they have in them. And this is a known factor in coffee farming all over the world, and so coffee is always sorted into different sizes because the bigger the size, the more dense they will be, and the more density it has, the more flavor it's going to have. And on that note, note, that's why Kona pea berries are so valuable, because not only are they rare, but a Kona pea berry is a coffee bean where only one bean was formed inside of the cherry. And so all of the nutrients that would have fed 2 big coffee beans is now feeding 1. And those have the highest concentration of density, and those always have incredible flavor. The second reason that coffee is sorted into different sizes is because different sized beans cook at different rates. And so you don't want a mixture of big, medium, and small beans when you're roasting, because the little ones are gonna cook way faster and potentially get burned by the time the big ones are fully roasted. Sorting them into different sizes seems like a marketing ploy, but it's not. It's all about quality and consistency. And again, just like I said at the beginning, it's all about the taste. So what does this actually mean in the real world? Well, I have here a Kona Earth sample pack. All of the beans here are the same size grading, and so they're gonna have that same density. They're gonna be roasted really evenly, but they've all been roasted to different levels. So this one, the medium dark, also called a full city roast, is the most popular way to roast Kona coffee. But in addition, we have one that is slightly lighter, a medium, and one that is slightly darker, a dark roast. Now, a lot of people are not gonna think of this as a true dark roast. This one is only slightly more roasted than this one. But it's kind of perfect because even though the roast levels are really, really similar, they don't taste the same. Let me set up some cups and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So now I've brewed each of these coffees in these little cups here. This is the way that coffee is professionally tasted, and it's called a cupping because you do it in a cup. I'm gonna start here in the middle with the medium dark roast, and we'll see what it tastes like and then compare it to something slightly lighter and something slightly darker. So it has a low acidity, a pretty low bitterness, very, very smooth. There's chocolatiness, allspice flavors, and a little bit of that green tea flavor I talked about earlier. This is a great cup of coffee. If I go to the slightly lighter side of the spectrum, let's see what we find there. Immediately you get more of that green tea flavor, but a lot of the chocolate and spices are gone. So it's not bad. It doesn't have any more acidity or bitterness than these beans do. Just a little difference in roasting and you end up with a pretty different result. If we go to the darker side of the spectrum, with this one, you can't really taste those grassy flavors at all. There's none of those green tea characteristics. It's all chocolate. You get a tiny bit more bitterness, but it's still relatively pretty low in the spectrum of how bitter coffee can be. And I think some of the spices are gone as well. This is a little bit more of a pure flavor, just chocolate and coffee roast kind of flavor. This one in the middle seems to be blending what you get on either edge of the spectrum. And there's a reason why this one's my favorite, because I think it's the most interesting. It doesn't prefer any one of those things, whether the chocolate, the spices, or the green tea characteristics, but it brings all of them together without losing sight of either one of them. So you can easily see why everyone takes the Kona Typica grown in the Kona coffee belt and roast it to this medium dark level. And like I said earlier, not everyone is going to prefer this level of roast. Some people don't really like that tea flavor. They're going to want to go toward the dark side of it. Maybe they want a little more bitterness to really punch through some milk and sugar if you're using it that way. Some people are going to like it a little bit lighter, a little bit more of those tea flavor characteristics and less of that rich chocolatey spice notes that you get here or there. In the end, you know, coffee bags typically don't tell you the climate in which they were grown. It doesn't tell you the varietal. I mean, some of them will, but most of them don't. What most of them are going to have instead are tasting notes. And at the end of the day, yes, the technical aspects of the genetics of the tree, the climate in which it's grown, the soil, the pH level, the rain, blah, 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 blah. All of those things are what determine how it's going to be roasted, and that's going to determine how it's going to taste in the end. But ultimately for you, what you're going to care about is not all of those things back up the pipeline. What you care about is what does it actually taste like. And I hope this video has helped you understand the reasons why one coffee is roasted one way, one's roasted another way, and that there really can't be this one-size-fits-all approach if you want something that's going to taste truly special and truly unique. So don't forget to visit KonaEarth.com if you're interested in trying any of their coffee, and I will see you in the next video.